Every empire has someone who works best in the shadows. For the Black Mafia family, that was Terry Flenory. Long before the headlines, the raids, and the courtroom drama, Terry was quietly moving pieces across the country, turning a small Detroit hustle into a criminal network worth hundreds of millions. While others soaked up the spotlight, he stayed focused on the unglamorous stuff: structure, supply, and staying alive. But the higher you climb, the harder the fall. And when the federal net finally closed in, even his silence couldn't save him from a 30-year sentence. Born January 10, 1970, in Detroit, Michigan, Terry Flenory came up as the little brother, 2 years behind Demetrius Big Meech Flenory. They didn't grow up with much, and that reality shaped everything. The neighborhood was rough, money was tight, and from early on, both brothers felt that pressure to find a way out. Not just to survive, but to really win. What makes their story interesting is that home wasn't chaos. Their parents, Charles and Lucille Flenory, actually tried to pour something solid into their kids. Charles worked as a carpenter and played music on the side. Lucille later became the CEO of a Detroit nonprofit called Building More Families. The values were there: work hard, be creative, do something with yourself. But outside the front door was a whole different world, and that world was loud, fast, and unforgiving. The Flenory kids grew up in Southwest Detroit, wedged between industrial towns like River Rouge and Ecorse, places that were struggling bad back then, even hitting bankruptcy. Detroit itself was changing fast in the 80s, and not for the better. The crack era hit the city like a storm. Violence spiked, money started moving different. The news was full of stories about street crews and flashy figures like Maserati Rick, Butch Jones, and Ed Hansard. That's what the streets were celebrating. That's what young boys were watching. So when Terry and Meech started hustling as teenagers, it didn't feel crazy to them. It felt normal. They began small, selling $50 bags in the mid-80s. Meech, who went by Meechy back then, jumped all the way in. At 16, he dropped out of school and made the streets his full-time job, and they moved fast. Those small bags turned into serious weight. Soon, they were pushing 2 kilos a week. Before the decade was over, Meech took his first trip to Atlanta, a city that would later become the heart of their operation. And back in Detroit, they were tight with a crew called the PA Boys from Puritan Avenue. They weren't official members, but they were close enough that the heat followed them too. The PA Boys were already under heavy law enforcement pressure, and anyone around them got watched. Names like Slim Brantley, the Dude Danzy, and T-Stuck Stucky were already known to the feds. And because Meech was in that circle, he ended up on the radar early, even before he realized it. By the mid-90s, the brothers understood that real money meant real connections. They couldn't keep buying from local suppliers, so they went west, chasing a direct line to the source. California was the move. That's where they linked up with a trafficker named Wayne Waniac Joyner, who helped connect them to Mexican cartel suppliers. Cutting out the middlemen meant more profit, fewer leaks, and way less risk of someone talking. To clean the money, Terry started a taxi company, using settlement cash from a malpractice lawsuit after a botched eye surgery to get it off the ground. On paper, it looked legit. Behind the scenes, it was a money funnel. Still, the law was never far behind. In 1994, Meech and a Colombian associate got arrested on drug charges, but the case fell apart due to lack of evidence. It was a warning shot more than anything. By then, the brothers weren't just a Detroit thing anymore. They had people in Kentucky, Georgia, Missouri, Texas, and California. Atlanta became the biggest prize. After the Miami boys, who once ran the city, got wiped out by federal cases, there was a power vacuum. The Flenory brothers stepped right into it. Meech moved to Atlanta to run the Southern operation himself, locking in relationships with local distributors and taking control of the supply. Then the seizures started stacking up. In October 1996, undercover agents took $300,000 in a Michigan sting tied to their crew. Later that month, ICE seized another $250,000 in Detroit, and that same day, police in California grabbed over $576,000 from Terry's longtime girlfriend, Tanisa Welsh. In 1997, Georgia police took $143,000 from Martez Jackson, believed to be a key player. In 1999, Texas officers seized 18 kilos of cocaine from their workers, and in Beaumont, police grabbed over $424,000 while arresting Bruce Martin, a close associate. The message was clear. The walls were closing in. By 2000, Terry relocated full-time to Los Angeles to be closer to the supply lines from Mexico. From that point on, the operation became two-headed. Meech ran the South from Atlanta, Terry ran the West from LA, same organization, different hubs. This was the era when the name Black Mafia Family took hold. BMF, a street brand that just happened to match Big Meech Flenory's initials too. Even with the name and the reach, the seizures kept coming. 17 kilos in Arizona in late 2000, 9 more in Kansas City in early 2001. At its peak, BMF was huge. Over 500 members across 11 states, Georgia, Florida, New York, California, and more. The reason they took over so many markets was simple. They had the cheapest and cleanest product. Buying straight from the cartel at about $9 a kilo, they could sell for 17, undercutting everyone while still making millions. And the quality was high, around 90% pure. They even branded it Hummer. Investigators later estimated the crew was moving around 600 kilos every single month. Now, 2003 was the year everything started to crack for the Black Mafia family. That was the year they stopped being a quiet power in the shadows and became a loud name in the streets and in the media. And once that happened, the feds locked in. From that point on, there was no more moving unnoticed. The warning signs came early. On January 26th, a Texas state trooper pulled over 2 BMF couriers, Brian Garnett and Kim Williams, in Gray County. A search of the car turned up over $700,000 in cash. Both men were arrested for money laundering, and just like that, investigators had a clean thread they could pull straight back to Detroit. By the summer, the net was getting tighter. In August, police in Arkansas seized 27 kilos of cocaine from another BMF associate. But the real explosion in Atlanta didn't come from a drug stop. It came from a sloppy, violent moment that brought way too much attention. On September 7th, 2 men tried to rob the townhouse of William Doc Marshall, BMF's money man. The robbery went bad, shots were fired, and one of the intruders was hit. When police arrived, they didn't just see a robbery scene. They found a kilo of cocaine and a huge empty safe inside the house. That one call gave Atlanta detectives a clear look at how deep the operation really ran. By October, the government stopped playing defense. On October 28th, the DEA, the IRS, and federal prosecutors teamed up and launched Operation Motor City Mafia. This wasn't a normal case anymore. It was a full-blown mission to bring the entire BMF structure down. Then came the night that turned everything sideways. November 11th, Demetrius was out at Club Chaos in Atlanta, moving like usual when he got into a heated argument with Anthony Wolf Jones, a former bodyguard to Sean Combs. The argument was over a woman, and it got loud enough that security kicked Wolf out of the club. Instead of leaving, Wolf and his associate Lamont Riz Gertie waited in the parking lot, leaning on Demetrius's Cadillac until he came outside. When Demetrius finally stepped out with Amin Bull Height, a confrontation sparked almost immediately. Words turned into gunfire in seconds. When it was over, Bull Height was shot in the foot. Demetrius was hit in the backside. Riz Gertie was dead at the scene. Wolf Jones was rushed to the hospital but didn't survive. Police later recovered 24 shell casings from the parking lot. An anonymous witness claimed Demetrius fired multiple shots, though that witness never testified. Later that morning, police found Demetrius and Height at a hospital. Height was never charged. Demetrius was charged with 2 counts of murder, released on bond, and placed on house arrest. Eventually, the case fell apart due to lack of solid evidence, and the charges were dropped. But by then, the damage was already done. The media had his name everywhere, his face was everywhere, and the streets were watching. So were the feds. That one night even changed the city. Atlanta moved its club closing time from 4 a.m. to 2 a.m., all because of the chaos tied to that shooting. But behind the scenes, the government was already deeper into the case than anyone realized. Just 6 days after the shootout, on November 17th, federal prosecutors indicted 8 top figures connected to the PA Boys, tightening the circle around BMF's old network. That pressure didn't just hit the organization, it hit the relationship between the brothers hard. By 2004, the tension was clear. Wiretaps picked up Terry Flenory talking to an associate in prison, saying flat out that he and his brother weren't even speaking anymore and that Demetrius had lost control of himself. Later recordings caught Terry venting again, saying Demetrius was letting people get in his head and didn't even know why he was angry. Terry had always been the quiet one, the one who liked to move clean and stay invisible. And now, in his mind, Demetrius was doing the exact opposite. Flashy lifestyle, club appearances, media attention, all of it felt reckless to him. He believed his brother was putting a spotlight on them that no one in that world could afford. After the 2003 shooting, that tension turned into a full break. The organization didn't just argue, it split. Two sides formed, two power centers, two separate chains of command. They were still technically under the same BMF name, but the unity was gone. Very few people answered to both brothers anymore. It became a house divided, and from that point on, the fall wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when. By the next year, the pressure from law enforcement was heavy, but Big Meech didn't slow down. He sped up. Instead of shrinking back, he stepped into the spotlight. In March, Demetrius made his first serious play at going legit by jumping into the music business. He launched BMF Entertainment and rolled out a lifestyle magazine called The Juice. On paper, it was a clean business move. In reality, authorities believed it was part hustle, part money wash, and part exit strategy from the streets. The brothers were trying to build something legal before the walls fully closed in. The magazine dropped loud. 2 covers, one with Meech as the executive editor, the other with a rising Atlanta rapper tied close to the movement, Young Jeezy. It was a message. BMF wasn't just a street name anymore, it was a brand. Meech didn't just back Jeezy, he pushed him hard. He made sure the music lived where the culture lived. Strip clubs, street corners, car speakers, everywhere that mattered. He showed up to video shoots with fleets of luxury cars and stacks of BMF chains for the crew to wear. Jeezy didn't hide the connection either. He shouted out Meech and BMF openly, turning the street ties into part of the rapper's image. BMF Entertainment officially focused on one artist, Blue Da Vinci, but Meech played the whole board. He paid for big budget videos and features with major names like Jeezy and Fabulous. The street marketing was aggressive. DJs were paid to spin records. Billboards went up across Atlanta claiming the world belonged to BMF. It was loud, flashy, impossible to ignore, and that was the problem. While the music was booming, the law was quietly tightening the net. In March and April, state troopers started hammering BMF couriers with traffic stops. These weren't random. Cars were getting pulled over with 100 kilos of cocaine. Others were getting stopped with $500,000 in cash. Every stop added another brick to the case. In April, things really popped when Tremaine Kiki Graham got arrested on trafficking charges. That arrest made noise because Graham was the son-in-law of Atlanta's mayor at the time. That alone guaranteed attention at the highest levels. By spring, the government stopped watching from the sidelines. A full task force came together with the DEA, ATF, Atlanta police, and prosecutors. And for the first time, they got permission to listen in. Phones started getting tapped. Demetrius stayed careful and mostly off the lines. Terry didn't. Over 1,000 of his calls were intercepted. In May 2004, a judge approved a wiretap on Terry's phone, and the agents started hearing everything. Calls about moving weight, calls about prices, calls about where and when product was going. It was no longer rumors, it was audio. Then came June 17th. One of the crew's drivers got pulled over heading toward Louisville. Police found 10 kilos of cocaine in the car, but more important than the drugs was the phone they found. Inside the call log was a recent call to a contact saved as Chiana Torrey. That number matched the same number a man known as Sims was using to talk to Terry on the tapped line. That was the bridge. Detroit called Louisville. Louisville went to a judge. A new wiretap got approved on Sims' phone. The paperwork laid everything out. Calls between Sims and the Flenory camp. A confidential informant saying he'd bought cocaine from Sims months earlier. The evidence stacked fast. The judge signed off, then extended the tap another month. During that time, agents recorded nonstop talk about cocaine distribution. That trail led them straight to the house of Sims's girlfriend, Karen Johnson. When they searched it, they found scales, ledgers, and BMF branding inside. The case wasn't just strong anymore, it was organized. While the investigation was growing, the violence wasn't slowing. On July 25th, a top BMF figure, Fleming Ill Daniels, was involved in a deadly shooting outside an Atlanta club called the Velvet Room. 3 days later, police seized nearly $200,000 from Martez Jackson. In September, A federal witness named Ulysses Hackett and his girlfriend were murdered in her apartment. That location happened to be tied to other BMF associates. Investigators believed the hit was meant to silence him before he could testify. By October, the streets were boiling. Between the 15th and the 17th, two more shootings linked to top-ranking members broke out, this time at popular clubs around the city. By 2005, BMF wasn't just a street story anymore. They were headline news, wrapped up in celebrity drama, rap beef, and real-world violence. The line between the music industry and the streets had completely disappeared, and everyone knew it. The wildest moment came on May 10th. A rising Atlanta rapper named Radrick Davis, better known as Gucci Mane, was involved in a deadly shooting during a home invasion in Decatur. One man was killed, and Gucci was charged with murder. According to his legal team, the men who broke into his home weren't random criminals. They claimed the group was connected to BMF and sent there because of the ongoing tension between Gucci and Young Jeezy, who was closely tied to the organization. That claim pulled federal agencies right into the situation. Gucci was questioned by the ATF, DEA, and FBI. In the end, Gucci was the only one charged, and those charges were eventually dropped, closing out one of the most talked about moments of the BMF and celebrity crossover. Just weeks later, things got ugly again, this time at a birthday party for Bobby Brown's father at Justin's, the Atlanta restaurant owned by Sean Combs. A verbal argument broke out between guests and men connected to BMF. It escalated fast. Two of Bobby Brown's nephews were attacked and stabbed with an ice pick. Witnesses said the suspects ran off alongside rapper Fabulous, adding even more star power to an already crazy story. But the case quickly collapsed. One suspect had his charges dropped when witnesses refused to cooperate. The other suspect, known as Baby Bleu, never made it to trial because he was killed in an unrelated incident the next year. Then came July 11th. Terry Flenory was pulled over in Illinois during what looked like a routine traffic stop. When police searched the vehicle, they found nearly $4 million worth of high-end jewelry. Terry wasn't just holding it. He was on his way to deliver it to Young Jeezy for a photo shoot. That one stop flipped into a full-blown money laundering investigation that reached deep into the music industry. That investigation started pulling in major names, including super producer Damon Thomas and celebrity jeweler Jacob Arabo, better known as Jacob the Jeweler. Damon Thomas was famous not just for music, but for being Kim Kardashian's first husband years before her rise to fame. One traffic stop ended up connecting the streets, the charts, and pop culture royalty in one strange web. By the end of 2005, Operation Motor City Mafia was wrapping up and the arrests came heavy and fast. The first major figure to fall was Omari O-Dog McCree. After months of surveillance and wiretaps, he pleaded guilty to trafficking charges. He started talking, explaining the scale of the operation, then suddenly stopped cooperating. The judge wasn't forgiving. He got 15 years. Then the feds went straight for the brothers. On October 20th, Demetrius was arrested at a rented mansion in Frisco, Texas. A week later, Terry was picked up at a private home outside St. Louis, along with several associates. Demetrius was granted bond, but with strict conditions. He was placed on house arrest under his mother's supervision, unable to move freely while waiting for trial. As more members were arrested, the true size of the case became clear. This wasn't a small operation. Law enforcement from all over the country was involved. Federal agencies, state police, city departments, and prosecutors from multiple states were all working the same case. By late October, 47 BMF members and associates were in custody. Authorities had already seized over 600 kilos of cocaine and around $14 million in cash and assets tied to the organization. By 2007, the clock had finally run out on the heavy hitters at the top of BMF. The feds didn't come light either. This wasn't a small sweep. The indictment named around 150 members tied to the organization. But the real weight of the case landed on the brothers themselves. Demetrius and Terry Flenory were the only two hit with the CCE charge, the continuing criminal enterprise statute, the federal government's version of calling someone a kingpin. That charge alone usually meant one thing: life behind bars. And the reason the government pushed that hard was simple. The scale of BMF was insane. At its peak in 2003 and 2004, the organization wasn't just moving drugs, it was moving weight. Hundreds of kilos of cocaine were being shipped every single month into hubs like Atlanta and Detroit. The operation ran like a corporate machine. High-end vehicles, including limousines, were fitted with hidden compartments. Those cars would roll in loaded with product, and once the drops were made, the same traps would be stuffed with millions in cash and sent right back to the suppliers in Mexico. BMF had roots in at least 11 states, and the money matched the reach. Reports estimated about 500 people on payroll and roughly $270 million made from trafficking alone. And Demetrius wasn't shy about it either. He moved like someone who knew he was untouchable, loud, flashy, and rich in a way that demanded attention. When the empire collapsed, the government came through and stripped it bare. Over 30 pieces of high-end jewelry were seized, 13 homes, 35 vehicles across Detroit, Georgia, and Los Angeles. The most famous symbol of it all was Demetrius's white Maybach 62, a $430,000 luxury monster that stood out in any city it touched. It was rumored to be one of a kind in the US, specially shipped in from overseas just to flex. What made things even more interesting was that the brothers weren't even moving together by then. They'd been estranged for years, running different sides of the operation in different ways. That split showed up in the charges. Demetrius faced 6 counts total, running a criminal enterprise, multiple cocaine conspiracy charges, and money laundering. Terry got hit heavier with 11 counts, the same kingpin charge, more drug conspiracy counts, multiple charges for using phones to set up deals, plus money laundering. On paper, Demetrius actually had the better legal position. He wasn't caught on wiretaps, and prosecutors didn't have a long line of witnesses ready to testify against him. But the risk was massive. If he took it to trial and lost, the sentence wasn't 30 years, it was mandatory life. So he folded. On November 29, 2007, Demetrius pleaded guilty in federal court in Detroit. By the next year, it was over. Both brothers were sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. Law enforcement called it a victory. They described BMF as a violent, sophisticated machine that started as a small Detroit hustle and turned into a nationwide empire with direct cartel connections. The message was simple. No matter how high someone climbs, gravity eventually wins. What really shocked people was that 2008 marked the first time either brother had ever been locked up. That came after a 20-year run at the top. But BMF wasn't just a street organization, it was a cultural force. Their money touched the music industry heavy. Rappers like Young Jeezy, T.I., and Fabulous all saw early boosts through BMF's support and promotion. But not everything stayed friendly. Violence followed the fame. Gucci Mane's legal team later claimed BMF was tied to an attempted hit on him over a music dispute. 2 of Bobby Brown's nephews were stabbed at a family party. NBA and NFL figures were questioned about financial ties to BMF associates. Even high-profile jewelers weren't safe from the fallout. Jacob Arabo, better known as Jacob the Jeweler, became one of the most famous names connected to the case. He was the go-to jeweler for hip-hop in Hollywood, selling diamond-covered watches and custom pieces to everyone from Jay-Z and 50 Cent to Leonardo DiCaprio and Jennifer Lopez. His signature 5-time zone watches became cultural trophies. But behind the shine, prosecutors said he was helping Terry Flenory clean money through jewelry purchases. That relationship ended with federal agents storming his Manhattan store in 2006. By 2008, he pleaded guilty to conspiracy and laundering, served prison time, paid millions, and watched his empire take a hit. Behind the scenes, BMF was storing drugs and cash inside massive suburban mansions called stash houses, often hidden in wealthy gated neighborhoods where police presence stood out more than criminals ever would. Properties had nicknames: the White House, the Gate, the Elevator, the Horse Ranch. Each one played a role. Terry's longtime girlfriend, Tanisa Welch, was tied to one of them on paper. That trail landed her a 5-year sentence for money laundering. Then the timeline shifted. In May 2020, Terry was released to home confinement due to COVID and his health. The prison system was getting crushed by outbreaks, and he was allowed to serve the rest of his sentence at home. The culture reacted immediately. Celebrities commented. Terry posted about faith and survival. The moment felt surreal. Demetrius tried the same path. He filed for compassionate release, arguing health risks. Prosecutors fought back hard, pointing to his prison violations and violent history. His attorney pushed the image of growth and change. The court didn't bite, not then. In 2021, Terry was reportedly shot in Detroit during a dispute tied to the street world, suffering a serious eye injury. That incident shifted his position in the underworld and raised concerns about retaliation and safety. Meanwhile, Demetrius quietly worked his sentence down. He earned his GED, he stayed eligible. And in October 2024, his attorney announced he'd been transferred to a halfway house in Miami. His full release was scheduled for January 2026, followed by supervised release. Then came the final twist. In 2024, President Joe Biden officially commuted Terry Flenory's sentence as part of the largest clemency action in modern U.S. history. Over 1,000 people received relief. Terry was one of them. He marked the moment online, ankle monitor off, paperwork in hand, victory visible. He spoke about faith, patience, and staying solid through the process. He made it clear he never folded, never begged, and never compromised himself to get there. And just like that, a story that started in Detroit streets, climbed into rap culture, flooded the money world, and shook the federal system finally slowed down.